so that you will be interacting with all the remote countries because of the meetings organized by ASEAN. Right? So in many ways, ASEAN was and is an active diplomatic community. Right? So it is wiser to plug into that circuit, so to speak. That is from the Chinese perspective. Right? So let's now talk about the breakthrough in Sino-ASEAN relations. How did China break into the ASEAN circuit, so to speak? Right? As I mentioned earlier, formal ties were established between China, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines way back in the 1970s, right? But then I must add by saying that as a whole, relations between China and ASEAN were not particularly cordial. Why? I'll explain here. The crux of the matter was that China's relations with Indonesia were still a problem. And Indonesia is what they call the big brother of ASEAN. It is the biggest country. Alright? Bigger than Thailand too. Alright? And so, why did Indonesia not resume diplomatic ties with China? Why were there reservations in Indonesia in having formal ties with China? Or resuming formal ties with China? So I'll try to explain here. The reason is there was the attempted coup by the Indonesian Communist Party way back in 1965. Alright? Many Indonesian generals and soldiers were killed because of the coup. If I were somebody from the Indonesian military, I will always have reservations about China. Because many of my colleagues, many of my former bosses were killed in this coup. Organized by the Indonesian Communist Party, allegedly supported by China. That's the problem. There were talks in having what is called a Jakarta-Beijing axis. That is under President Sukarno. And then of course Suharto took over after the coup. Right? The point you should note is that the Indonesians could not forgive China because of his involvement, or allegedly his involvement, with the coup of 1965. And diplomatic ties were actually suspended in 1967. And the perception in Indonesia was China is a major security threat towards Indonesia. Right? And so in that way, no way Indonesia would like to have any interactions with China. Right? Because of his concern with his own security. Alright? And it's like this. But then, of course, international relations began to change, right? And this can be a topic for another lecture, but let me just recap and highlight more important things related to China. In the case of China, of course, I've already talked about the Sino-American detente, and in 1979, China and the United States established formal ties. The Americans just ditched Taiwan. Taiwan will no longer be recognized as the representative of China. Now they recognize Beijing as the representative of China, starting from 1979. Alright? And with the rise of Deng Xiaoping, as I said earlier, China began to open up. China began to interact with the outside world. And of course, there was the rise of China. Whether you like it or not, you have to talk to China because of the rise, because of its power, because of its economic resources. Alright? So, under these circumstances, the Indonesian Foreign Ministry, I met a number of them, would tell President Suharto that it's totally unrealistic for us to ignore China. We have to talk to China. Alright? And then the Indonesian Chinese Chamber of Commerce, I was invited to give a talk over there, and I can see that they were very eager China market. Because everybody was talking about China at that point, and there were opportunities in China. So you don't go out, you don't go, Singaporeans, Malaysians, and Thai to go in. And so you miss, a big opportunity to have, economic interactions and also economic upgrading by interacting with China. And so, as I said, the thinking was Indonesia should bank on China's foreign organizations. It is also unrealistic to ignore China in regional affairs. All right? Especially when you look at the Cambodian issue and also the South China Sea conflicts. China is critical. If ever we want to solve the problem. All right? And so it was under such circumstances that Indonesia resumed diplomatic ties with China in August 1990, right? And with that, we followed suit. And Brunei likewise did the same in the 1990s. Well, since I'm from Singapore, let me just say a few words about our ties with China. For Singapore, our ties with China are mainly economic in nature, trade, investment, and so on and so forth. In fact, our personal paper that says economics in command. All right? And that is the most critical part, and Singapore is very practical. All right? And by the time when it interacted with China, there was less concern about the loyalty of its own ethnic Chinese. Bear in mind that in the old days, especially for the older generation, they don't think Singapore was their country. They think the motherland was China. So it is a problem if you want to build Singapore up as an independent nation, right? Fortunately, given more time, the younger generation began to identify with Singapore as their own country, right? And in that way, as I said, there was less concern about the loyalty of the ethnic Chinese, right? And then Singapore used to be dubbed as the so-called third China, because there are so many Chinese in Singapore. They think, oh, Singapore is another China, all right? It's the third China. First is of course China. Second China is Taiwan. Third China is Singapore, all right? And so we have to tell our ASEAN friends, including the Thais here, that no, we are very different. We are Chinese, but we are Singaporean Chinese. We identify with Singapore as our country. So in that way, to some extent, we were quite successful in dispelling what is called the third China image, right? Last but not least is the communists. The reason why we merged with Malaysia was because of the threat from the communists. But when the agreement of Deng Xiaoping to cut his support to the communists, we can see that communism is no longer appealing to the people in Singapore. Alright? In the old days, no. We have Chinese supporting China, identifying with China. But if you talk to the younger generation in Singapore, I don't think they really look to China. Alright? Chances are they look at the United States, they look at Britain, they look at Australia, alright? Or rather China, alright? Okay, anyhow, because of all these changes, Singapore, of course, felt more comfortable in having diplomatic ties with China, alright? And when we have formal ties with China, that was in 1990, late 1990, it was a very simple affair. We don't want to make a big fuss out of it. So if you look at our joint statement with China when we established formal ties, there were only one or two sentences in the communique. I can't remember the exact wording, but that one or two sentences just said, we'll establish formal ties and exchange ambassadors. Full stop. That's it. That's how we established formal ties with China. We did not talk about Taiwan issue, how to resolve them, whether it's one China, one Taiwan. No, we did not say anything like that. We simply said that we'll have formal ties and exchange ambassadors. Full stop. That's all. Alright? But before that short statement was signed, there were a lot of discussions behind the scenes, of course, right? Because we do have some problems in working with China. What are these? One, our leaders could no longer visit Taiwan, including Lee Kuan Yew. Because in the old days, Lee Kuan Yew used to visit Taiwan very often, Yang Jing-kuo is his good friend, alright? And sometimes once in a while when Lee Kuan Yew is sick, he'll go to Taiwan to see a doctor, alright? Because the medical care in Taiwan is actually quite good, alright? And so there were a lot of discussions on that, and we insisted that we should be allowed to go, just the same. And so the agreement was, okay, if you insist, only low-profile visits to Taiwan. Don't try to make it, like a big event. When you go, behind the scene and take a low profile. All right, that was the agreement. Right? The second one, of course, is important for Taiwan. That we have to change the name of Taiwan's president in Singapore from ROC, Republic of China, to Taipei Trade Representative Office. In other words, you cannot use Taiwan's official title ROC, Republic of China. Because once you use this term, it means that you have a two-China policy, which is not acceptable to China. China insists in having a one China, and that is the PRC, not the ROC. Alright? And so, if you want to join the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and you are dealing with China, make sure you bear this in mind. Otherwise, you create a lot of problems for your own government. Right? China will kick up a big fuss because you Thai officials are using this official name of Taiwan, and you got yourself into trouble too, right? So in that way, bear this in mind. This term cannot be used in all official correspondence with the PRC, that is the government regime. All right? And so, last but not least, we have to discuss with the Chinese that we'll continue to have our Starlight project. I don't know if you are aware of that. Singapore has been sending its military, our army boys, to Taiwan for training. Because we don't have the space, to train our army. Singapore is so small. Our Air Force, once it takes off, will fly to Malaysia and Indonesia. So how can we train our military? So we look around, and Taiwan was willing to provide the manpower and the resources and the space for us to train our army. And that's why under this project called Starlight Project, we have been sending our soldiers to Taiwan for training. Do you think it's a problem if you want to have ties with the other side? That is China. So China raised the issue, and eventually we said, okay, our soldiers are trained to fight, not against China, but because of our concern of security threats from nearby countries. So we seek the understanding of the Chinese that we need space in Taiwan to train our army boys. We also impress on the Chinese that we send them to Taiwan and other places for training too, not just Taiwan. So Taiwan is just one of the places where we train our soldiers. So eventually, the Chinese said, okay, we will not really object too much. They did not really endorse it. They said, there's no objection. Right? You can do whatever you want, right? As long as you bear in mind that your soldiers are meant for maintaining the security of Singapore, and it's not meant to fight against China. Okay, so that was the understanding, right? So after Singapore, then Brunei followed, and let me just move on to the next slide, right? How to break into the ASEAN circuit. Of course, when you look at China, its big size, its proximity geographically, its ethnic outreach, lack of transparency in defense will always create real and emerging problems, alright? I mean, big place, right? And so, this is a problem. But if it is a problem, then the thinking was that we have to engage China. We have to talk to China. And ASEAN has been adopting what we call step-by-step approach in engaging China. Alright? To make a long story short, because of the limitation of time, let me just mention that eventually, of course, the step-by-step approach led to the invitation of China to join the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is the major security meeting for all the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, but hosted by ASEAN. Right? Next, please. And China evidently was happy. Next slide. Was happy to join the ARF and some other meetings. All right. At first, it was not so active. All right. But then later on, began to use the multilateral meetings. Once they learned that these meetings are not to be fighting against China, that they can use all these meetings to dilute the influence of the Americans. The Chinese began to be very active. Alright? And then they will support ASEAN in what is called a driver's seat in organizing all these multilateral meetings. Alright? Next slide, please. And so, in economic terms, the Chinese try to be helpful. For example, the most important indicator that China has been helpful is the launching of this ASEAN-China free trade area. And this agreement has already been implemented starting from 2010. And because of this, it greatly facilitated the trade between China and ASEAN, including Thailand, right? In fact, Singapore is now the top foreign investor in China for the last 2 years. Right? And so China likewise is also investing in ASEAN. Next slide. And I would suggest that when they launch the Maritime Silk Road, there will be more investments from China. Right? So with that, let me just move on to some of the problems that you may have when you're trying to cooperate with China. No doubt, in terms of trade, economic years, it's very, very close. But there are actual competition. There are also even conflicts. Let me just briefly go through some of these problems that we may encounter when we look at China. What are these? One, of course, is a competition for investment, competition for foreign markets, because some of the ASEAN countries are in a similar stage of development as China. Our products are the same. We are also trying to attract the same foreign direct investment. And so do you think that there's competition? Because some of these, they won't come here. They go to China. Right? They won't come to Thailand. They won't come to Singapore. And so that way, there is some sort of competition for what we call FDI, foreign markets. When you want to export, we are aiming at more or less the same market, the US, Europe, and so forth. Again, there is competition between China and ASEAN. But I think the most serious conflict that we have with China is no doubt the South China Sea territorial disputes. I've actually spent one full lecture on that for another class. All right? Let me just summarize the problems that we have with China in the case of the South China Sea. All right? the South China Sea involves quite a number of parties, and the most serious conflict is, of course, the Socrates, which is the largest South China Sea group, right? And of course, there are so many parties involved in that conflict, including some of the ASEAN states. And from China's perspective, it's like this: they claim to have indisputable sovereignty over all the islands in South China Sea. Alright? If you look at the Chinese claim, their maps will show that they have 9 dashes encircling all the islands in the South China Sea. Alright? So in that way, it is going to be a problem because some of us, namely Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Vietnam, and so on and so forth, are also claiming at least parts of the Socrates, but in case of Vietnam, the whole of the South China Sea, right? And all of us involved in the conflict, except Brunei, have already stationed troops in the area. So I would suggest that there could be conflicts, military conflicts, by design or by accident. Alright? And so the situation there, as I've said in the other lecture, it could be a time bomb. The bomb will not explode right away, but if you don't manage it properly, it will explode. Alright? So before it's too late, we have to do something, trying to see if we can work something out with the Chinese in this slide, please. And in the case of Chinese, okay, it's a problem, we recognize that, but we'll talk to you only bilaterally, one-to-one. Alright? No internationalization of the issue. The Chinese will not go to any multilateral forums, they will not go to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, they will not put the case before the UN, but it just wants to talk to you bilaterally. Because that is to the advantage. China is big. Ask Brunei to talk to China, Brunei will feel threatened, intimidated, because it's talking to a big country. Right? So anyway, that's the Chinese approach. But then for some of us, we prefer to use the UN law of the sea to resolve the conflicts. And in the case of the Philippines, we would like to present the case to the Permanent Court of Arbitration to see whether they have a case in claiming parts of the Socrates. Alright? But of course, bear in mind for this issue, it's not just for China and some of the ASEAN states. The Americans, the Indians, the Japanese, and possibly the Australians, and other users of the sea lanes are also interested and concerned about the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. And so they would also play a role. And some of them would also be interested in having joint developments of the South China Sea. Because after all, there is oil, there's supposed to be gas in the South China Sea, right? So this is actually one of the most important conflicts that we have with the Chinese, all right? So with that, perhaps I can move on to other issues, which is basically water-based resources that can harm the relationship between China and ASEAN. And of course, the South China Sea is one major water resource that we may have a problem with China, but since you are from Chiang Rai, you should know very well that the Mekong River, the Mekong Basin, could be a source of conflict between China and some of the countries in ASEAN. The reason is that China is building dams in the upper reaches of the Mekong River. And the building of these dams, as you know, would affect the farming and fishing communities. It would also affect the local communities on downstream Southeast Asian states, right? Including Thailand, and especially Cambodia and other places, and Vietnam too. And And so, but China is insisting that it is one way they can develop what's called hydropower, or hydroelectricity. It's cleaner and greener, and it's a very important source of energy for them. So they'll press on to build the dams. And I would say that, that could be a problem between China and some of the countries in Southeast Asia, right? That are affected by the building of these dams, right? All right, next please. And so the final problem, if I may just add a little bit, is actually the Sino-ASEAN border, all right? And the disputes at the border. Why? Basically, they are related to China's links and support for border minority groups. For those of you from Myanmar, I'm sure you know very well that these minority groups, Hua, Kachin, and so on and so forth, could be linked to China and could be getting support from China in dealing with the central government, right? So in that way, I would suggest that, if you examine a bit deeper, then you know that, it could be a source of problem between China and some of ASEAN states, especially Myanmar, for example, right? But I must add by saying that China has already resolved the land boundary between Vietnam and China, right? That's done. Let me add a little bit. It has also resolved the boundary in the Gulf of Tonkin, right? The Gulf of Tonkin between China and Vietnam. The residual conflicts, of course, are always the parallels and the strategies, right? So with that, let me conclude. I hope I've got 5 minutes or 3 minutes or so. Let me make a few concluding remarks, right? Can I go back? Yeah. Now, in spite of the problems and conflicts, I think China and ASEAN have agreed that such differences should not hamper the overall cordial relationship between the two sides. All right? By and large, I would suggest that our leaders in ASEAN, the leaders in China, are intelligent enough to see the bigger picture. All right? I mean, if you just talk about South China Sea, it's very serious, very problematic. But there are other things that you can work on, right? There are other areas that we can work together with China. That's why I thought, and in the case of Thailand, it's been actually doing the right thing. Yeah, we know that the South China Sea is a problem, but can we just put it aside and then work on other areas that we can work together? Trade, investment, obviously, the areas that we can work together, right? So Singaporeans, yes, we're concerned about South China Sea because we depend on shipping. If there are problems in South China Sea, our economy will be affected. But we are actually in a position to say that, okay, it's a problem, but I'll work with China and invest there. So much so that Singapore is a top investor in China. So South China Sea is not a problem in that way, right? So in that way, of course, you must not blow the issue, the problems out of proportion. Because if that is the case, it would harm the overall cordial Sino-ASEAN relations. The South China Sea, yes, it is a problem, but I've suggested here, why don't we just spend some time talking about joint development and putting aside the issue of sovereignty disputes. All right? So it is actually going to be mutually beneficial, all right, if there is joint development. But of course, I must add by saying that I've been proposing some projects too for them to develop jointly. But all these proposals have not been able to take off. Why? Because once you have picked a place for joint development, there's bound to be one or two countries saying that area belongs to me. You cannot have joint development. Because every single inch of the South China Sea is claimed by somebody. So, can you start joint development? So it's easier said than done, although that is the overall direction that we should take. All right? And finally, I would say that so far when we talk about problems, when we talk interact with the Chinese, it's always at the official level. All right? Mainly restricted to diplomats and trade officials. But then I have noticed, look at the last slide, that actually the problems could involve a wide range of ministries. Notably, some of these could be related to defense, security. So you have to involve the military, the soldiers, the officials from the Ministry of Defense. Other than that, yes, discussions are always at the top, at the very elitist level. But then bear in mind that some of these problems could be related to the local government. For example, the problem with the Mekong River, Mekong Basin. It could be related to the local government. The South China Sea conflict could be related to the local government. For example, in the case of China, it could be related to Hainan. Hainan is the province governing the South China Sea. So it cannot be just Beijing. Beijing will have to liaise with Hainan. And that's why you have to involve the local officials. Last but not least, I would say that it's wiser to engage our interactions on what is called people's level and our level. That is, people's level, you go to China as a tourist, interact with the Chinese are coming here, and they see Thailand, they see Singapore, and they see Malaysia. Hopefully, with all these dialogues and interactions, that it could promote what we call transparency and understanding, making China and ASEAN to be more responsive to each other's needs, concerns, and aspirations. All right? With that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Lee Lai Cho. And now, please welcome Associate Professor Dr. Julaship Chinawano for our special discussion session. Please.
Good afternoon, Professor Lee Lai Cho, my good old friend, colleagues, and students. I'm very pleased to be here in beautiful and cool Chiang Rai to participate in the Social Innovation Public Lecture on ASEAN-China relations. First, before my comments, I would like to thank Ajahn Siripon, the acting dean of the School of Social Innovation, for inviting me to this event. Second, I enjoyed the presentation on the overview, the very comprehensive overview of the China-ASEAN relation by Dr. Lee Lai Cho, a prominent scholar from Singapore, a good friend of mine for a long time. We know each other for more than 20 years. I met each other intermittently at various conferences and seminars in many countries, and today in Chiang Rai. After listening to your eloquent lectures, there's no need for me to comment because you cover the ground from ancient time up to the present. But if she's here, you may not be very happy. You might just say, I agree with Dr. Lee Lai Cho, and let's end our public lecture. And therefore, I will make a short comment for about 20 minutes or less, and then maybe having 10 minutes for a discussion. I have to apologize for not being able to stay here longer because I have to catch a plane at 4 o'clock. I have class tomorrow. Anyway, in my opinion, the China-ASEAN relation has been quite dynamic as well as complex, especially in the second decade of the 21st century. For China, ASEAN as a regional grouping is the focal point of Chinese diplomacy in the periphery, especially in Southeast Asia. China's development and rise to be a great power is to a certain extent depend upon a stable and economically vibrant Southeast It is China bilateral relationship with some individual ASEAN members that experience a problem because of territorial dispute. As for ASEAN, the strategic importance of China is quite obvious, especially because of the geographical proximity, its economic influence, and also its military capabilities. To many observers, ASEAN-China relations in recent years seem to be dominated by one of the problems that Dr. Lee Lai-no has mentioned, the South China Sea dispute. And this issue concerning the overlapping maritime boundary territory claimed by China and four ASEAN members, Brunei, Malaysia, Philippines, and Vietnam, on part of South China Sea have led to some tension and often seen as the potential flashpoint in the region. But in fact, ASEAN-China relation is not only that particular issue. In fact, it's much broader and it incorporates many other activities. In my opinion, ASEAN-China cooperation is very broad, cover more than 10 priorities areas, for example, agriculture, infrastructure, communication, human resource development, investment, energy, transportation, public health, tourism, and environment. So I think when we look at China-ASEAN relationship, we have to keep the big pictures in your mind. ASEAN-China relations began their dialogue only 25 years ago, but as Dr. Lee Lai-no mentioned, that the relationship between China and Southeast Asia has a long historical experiences from the Yuan dynasty up until the Qing dynasty, and also a lot of the overseas people migrating to Southeast Asia, and that was the cause of economic. I'm not going to touch upon it because it has been quite well presented by Dr. Lee Lai-no. But what I'm going to say is that after ASEAN-China started their dialogue in 1991, in that year, Malaysian government invited Chen Jichen, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China, to attend the opening session of the 21st ASEAN Ministerial Meeting. Because a few years earlier, all ASEAN members have diplomatic relationship with China. Dr. Lee Lai-no has mentioned that Malaysia was first in 1974, later on Philippines and Thailand in 1975. That's why we are celebrating 40-year anniversary of Chinese-Thai relations this year. And then by 1990s, after close cooperation between China and ASEAN about the Philippines invasion of Cambodia, trying to pressure Vietnam out of Cambodia, the relationship seemed to be much closer and more trust, and many ASEAN countries felt that China are sincere neighbor they can trust. And that's why in 1991, Indonesia decided to have diplomatic relationship. In fact, I would like to say that Thailand has played quite an important role. I had a chance to talk to Air Chief Marshal Sit, the foreign minister, and he told me that the Chinese foreign minister has asked him to convey the message to Indonesian foreign minister that China wants very much to have a close relationship with our ASEAN, including Indonesia. And Air Chief Marshal Sit introduced the Wuchusian, the Chinese foreign minister, to the Indonesian. So Thailand played quite a role as a bridge to trying to make ASEAN-China relationship much closer. So by 1991, after Indonesia, we have Brunei and Singapore as Dr. Lee Lai-no. And that's where ASEAN and China start their dialogue as a group in 1991. 5 years later on, China and ASEAN developed into a full dialogue partners. After formally attaining the full dialogue partner status in 1996, ASEAN-China relations also developed quickly. And in 2003, both sides agreed to sign the joint declaration on strategic partnership with plan of actions. Now we are at the 2016 to 2020 plan of action. Moreover, China is the dialogue partner to accede to the Treaty of Amity or Cooperation Act in 2003. China is also the first country who expressed interest in the first nuclear weapon state which expressed its intention to accede to the Protocol of Shanghai, Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Zone. ASEAN and China have also collaborated to address transnational non-traditional security threats such as drug, human trafficking, piracy, and terrorism. So you can see that there are a range of activities in which China and ASEAN have closely cooperated with each other. Trade and economic ties between ASEAN and China have been growing rapidly. China has been ASEAN's largest trading partner since 2009. Before that, we had Japan, United States, but from 2009 onward, China became the largest trading partner of ASEAN, while ASEAN is now China's third largest trading partner. Bilateral trade stood at about 320 billion in 2012, and it is targeted that by 2020, 5 years from now, the bilateral trade between China and ASEAN should reach maybe $1 trillion US dollars. In November 2012, Dr. Lee has also mentioned that China and ASEAN signed ASEAN-China free trade agreement, which also helped to expand the trade between China and ASEAN. Moreover, the China-ASEAN Expo has been organized and hosted by China on an annual basis in Nanjing since 2004. That also helped to promote further trade between China and ASEAN. Moreover, ASEAN is now China's fourth largest destination for China outward investment, and ASEAN is China's third largest source of foreign direct investment. Two-way investment is targeted to reach 150 billion by 2020. As for Thailand, China is now the largest partner, the number one largest trading partner of Thailand, replacing Japan and the United States. Moreover, from the BOI, Board of Investment, next year China is probably will be the largest investor in Thailand, replacing Japan. Moreover, China has also become a major source of tourism for ASEAN, including Thailand. In 2012, about almost 9 million Chinese tourists visit ASEAN countries, a growth of about 20% over 2011. As for Thailand, if you look into the statistics by the tourist ministry, you will find that in 2014, about 4 million Chinese. And we expect that this year, 2015, maybe 5 million. Maybe we can calculate by looking at the numbers of the year. 2014, 4 million. 2015, 5 million. Maybe 2016, it may be 6 million. That's maybe one indicator about how close Thailand and China has been. But this phenomenon has not only Thailand oriented, been affected all the other ASEAN countries. In socio-cultural field, cooperation between ASEAN and China is also very broad, covering the area of education, culture, public health, science and technology, labor and local government, and people-to-people exchange, media, youth, and social development. For example, on education, you may be interested. Since 2010, ASEAN and China have made effort to double 100,000 goal of student mobility that envisage the number of exchange students from ASEAN countries to China to reach 100,000 by 2020. So there are a lot of chances for you to go to visit China. In fact, it's very close from here to China. You can even walk to China, but it takes a few days, whether go by boat or go by coach or other way, or by plane, the easiest. Moreover, 10 ASEAN-China education and training centers have already been established in 6 provinces of China. ASEAN and China also designated last year, the year 2014, as ASEAN-China Cultural Exchange Year. Moreover, China has also established the Confucius Institute in all ASEAN countries. In Thailand, Confucius Institute in various universities of the North Thailand, including in these universities. They also established Confucius classroom in many high schools, for example, in Tada High School, in Wat Trai High School, for example. So relations and exchanges between China and ASEAN has expanded tremendously. Well, talking about the positive side, I would like to talk about if you look at the geo-economics and geo-social dimension, you can see that ASEAN-China relationship has been moving in a positive direction. But for the geopolitical relations, things that had to be taken into consideration. Dr. Lee Lai-to has mentioned about the South China Sea and also the land border area, including the Mekong rivers development matters. Let me add a few things to what Dr. Lee Lai-to has just mentioned, is that the tensions between China and South ASEAN countries start in 1990, especially the clash between China and the Philippines over the fishing trip in South China Sea. But this matter, as Dr. Lee Lai-to mentioned, the Chinese also proposed a bilateral solution, but the Philippines sizing that the asymmetrical power relation, so they prefer a collective, asking ASEAN to be the intermediaries. Thailand played quite an important role in this because we know China very well and we saw a good friend of the Philippines and we were able to convince both sides to agree upon. And the first ASEAN-China meeting on the South China Sea is in Hangzhou in 1996. And from then on, the relationship became better because it was mitigated by a certain extent by 2002 DOC, Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. While the parties to the declaration declared that they undertook to resolve their territorial and jurisdictional disputes by peaceful means and to exercise self-restraint in the conduct of activity that would complicate or escalate dispute and affect peace and stability. However, the DOC weakness is that it is not legally a binding agreement. Therefore, the present tensions, especially since 2010, between some ASEAN members and China, indicate that the failure not far for the regional multilateral diplomacy between ASEAN and China. And therefore, there has been a concern that in order to prevent further conflict and confrontation, we should bring about a binding code of conduct, the COC, in order to mitigate the possibility of the armed conflict or confrontation either way, as Dr. Lee Lai-to mentioned. But China seems not to be quite enthusiastic about a COC. When Thailand became the coordinator of the ASEAN-China dialogue relations in 2013, Thailand tried very hard and quite successful in becoming a in trying to bring about the discussion and dialogue between ASEAN and China about this. And we were able to engage the Chinese to discuss about the DOC. In fact, in the past 3 years that Thailand has played a role as coordinator, we were able to get some agreement. They call it commandant among ASEAN and China. However, we have to pass on our coordinator to Singapore. Right now, Singapore is now the coordinator on the ASEAN-China, and I am sure that Singapore, with the help of Thailand and also Indonesia, will be able to conclude this COC so that problems will be mitigated. So, in other words, the South China Sea line as a crossroad of some of the most important trends in Asia-Pacific region today. The rising power of China, the U.S. rebalance environment and take a sharp edge of the growing competition between China, the rising power, and the United States, the hegemonic power. In fact, I think the Chinese leader also realized that South China Sea would be the sore part in the good ASEAN-China relations. And therefore, with the new leadership of Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, the new Chinese leadership, the fifth generation, led by Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang, has appeared to reposition China relations in ASEAN. In October 2013, President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang embarked upon a high-profile trip to 5 members of ASEAN. Xi Jinping made a statement to the Indonesian Parliament on the 3rd October 2013 before he in Indonesia, and he wanted to build a community of common destiny. China, let me repeat, China wants to build a community of common destiny with ASEAN members. What kind of common community? That can be seen from the talk by the President, the Premier of China at the 16th ASEAN-China Summit on October 2013. Li Keqiang made a proposal known as 2+7 cooperation framework. 2+7, the Chinese like call this code word. 2+7 cooperation framework. They reveal the new leadership policy direction regarding Southeast Asia for the next decade and signal China's attempt to find a new direction for her relationship with ASEAN. The 2+7 cooperation framework consists of a 2-point political consensus that the basis for promoting cooperation between China and ASEAN is deeper strategic trust. I think the Chinese realize that there has been trust between China and ASEAN. That's why one of the two consensus they want to have is promoting cooperation through deepening the strategic trust and good neighborliness. The other one was the key to deepening cooperation is to focus on economic development and expanding mutual benefit. The 7-point proposal of SADC candidates that the Chinese proposed to cooperate with ASEAN. And this 7-point proposal has some interesting ideas for further cooperation, including signing a treaty on good neighborliness, upgrading the ASEAN-China free trade area, setting up an ASEAN infrastructure investment AIIB, which the Chinese has already set up with ASEAN member as a participant, and also building a 21st maritime Silk Road. This is also the initiative that Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang has been promoted. Yi-Tai is one economic belt, and Yi-Lu is one economic road, and it's related to the Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road. If you look at China at the center, on the western part, economic belt, the new Silk Road economic belt, linking China with the Central Asia, with the Middle East, and also to Europe. And for the eastern part of China, you have this new maritime Silk Road for the 21st century, which will include the coastal part of China and also Southeast Asia into the Indian Ocean. So in other words, the Chinese have been using the past to serve the present and the future. As a result, I think let's take a look. Let me conclude by looking at ASEAN strategies toward China in order to keep a good relation. ASEAN members adopt a range of strategies, but in general, I think the trend is to engage with China strategically. In other words, the strategic engagement with China has 3 distinct characteristics. The first one by engaging in economic dimensions, trading with China and bringing China into regional institutions. ASEAN can reap economic benefits and at the same time create an opportunity so socialize China into the regional norms and behaviors, the ASEAN norms. The second one is by engaging not only China but also other major powers in a balanced way. I call this balanced strategic engagement with China and all the other major powers. Engage them in a balanced way in the same regional organization, ASEAN Regional Forum, for example. ASEAN can encourage dialogue and consultation among them and prevent any one great power from dominating the regions. While not a concern of great power, ASEAN strategy leads to a delicate balance of interests in the regions. Within this arrangement, therefore, ASEAN can seek to manage, maybe to a certain extent, a limited one, the relation between great power by acting as an intermediary. And the third characteristic of this strategic engagement with China and the major powers is that by preventing one great power from dominating regional affairs, ASEAN can maintain its centrality in East Asian regionalism. In order to stay relevant, ASEAN must maintain its centrality in shaping regional norms and institutions so that interstate relations are conducted in a rule-based system rather than in the realm of unconstrained power politics. ASEAN unity mattered a great deal for this purpose and enhanced ASEAN status and influence in shaping regionalism. I am a bit concerned about ASEAN centralities and ASEAN unity because without ASEAN unity, ASEAN centrality will be in question. And I think at the moment we will see that some country has already depended upon China. And that has an effect on ASEAN unity. So I think it is important that ASEAN members, especially Thailand, Singapore, and Indonesia, should work together in order to maintain this unity and also centrality. In other words, to conclude my talk, ASEAN must try to enhance its capacity and develop a clear vision and roadmap for an enduring rule-based regional security order. It should also enhance the management of existing multilateral processes through improving connectivity and coordination and delineating clearly the primary role and competency of each process within the regional security architecture for peace and stability in Southeast Asia.
So, is there any question to our distinguished guests? We can ask now.
I am Ken from Burma. I am instructor from School of Social Innovation. In my opinion, and by learning, I think we ASEAN have one impossible dream, which is ASEAN unity. And also by our topic, ASEAN and China, I do not think China really treats us as one. According to their bilateral policy, they always treat us as 10. So my question is, I have several questions. Does China's desire to become hegemonic power on ASEAN? For example, in terms of ethnic issues, China never treat a country as one. They treat the government in one way and they treat another opposition group in another way. And in ASEAN itself, the people and the government are not one too. If we study about Thailand, Burma, it's the same. The government is another different group and we are in another state. So my question is, for China, do they have a desire to be hegemonic power? Because they keep helping opposition group. For example, in Burma, they are helping Wa Kachin, Kokang, when they have no good relationship with the junta or the regime. But now, starting from next year, we are going to have a people government, not just a junta. So my question is, what is the main purpose in terms of ASEAN? Do they want to become a hegemonic power? Number two, to Ajahn, especially to Ajahn Chulachit, as the coordinator of ASEAN-China dialogue relation from 2013 to 2015, Thailand is a coordinator. Do you think Thailand can be an honest broker, not agent, but an honest broker between ASEAN and China? And number three, we have mentioned a lot about One Belt, One Road China policy, but I think the second road, Maritime Silk Road, just passed by Banda Aceh or Southeast Asia part of Thailand, not to another 8 nations. So, as a scholar, how about your skeptical opinion, not supporting opinion, but how about your skeptical opinion, whether this kind of thing can help the development of ASEAN? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. Before I respond to the questions, perhaps I'll respond to the remarks made by Professor Chulachip too. I think it's very nice of Professor Chulachip to add in more points, especially those on social cultural aspect, because my presentation is basically on the political, security, and economic aspects. But I think it's important for us to understand there are also other interactions too, right, between China and ASEAN. And after all, bear in mind that there is always hard power and soft power. And China is trying to promote its soft power too, not just hard power. It's not always guns and bullets. And that's why all these cultural and educational exchanges and tourism and whatnot, I think would be very important factors in promoting understanding between China and ASEAN. Of course, the Confucius Institute and other things I think will come in, are handy as examples of the so-called soft power exercised by China. That's one thing. A second point that I want to add is that the strategies adopted by ASEAN, correct? I think Professor Chulachip mentioned quite a few, engaging China in a balanced way, and of course the importance of the centrality of ASEAN will be critical. But let me just add by saying that for ASEAN, yes, we would like to engage China, but we also want to engage other major powers. It's not a classical balance of power. I don't know if you are familiar with theories in international relations. It's not a classical balance of power. It is trying to actually dilute the influence of any major power wanting to play a dominant role or hegemonic role. Let's now respond to the question raised by Ken. In the sense that we are trying to invite them to come. And we are realistic to understand that you cannot ask the major powers to leave us alone. No way. Alright? What do? If I'm from Thailand or you're from Singapore. So, our strategy is that the more the merrier. Come, why not? Come to Southeast Asia. But we make sure that there's some balance, right, among them. And I may want to suggest one term that you can use to analyze this sort of situation. It's what we call a hedging strategy. I don't know if you play with shares and stocks. When you buy shares and stocks, most of you would like to hedge your bets. You know how to hedge your bets? You don't want to say buy just one share and one share alone. You try to diversify your investments in into a number of shares to lessen your risk. And you can apply the same strategy when you look at foreign policy and security policy. You don't want to bank on just China or bank on the United States alone. You want to spread your linkages, you want to spread your risk. And in that way, okay, the Americans will know, okay, we engage you, you can join ERF as a member. Okay, China, we want you too, we want to engage you, you can be a member of ERF. So in that way, nobody, no one power can actually dominate, including the Americans. Right? And so you ask whether China can be a hegemonic power. I really have my doubts. Because the Americans are here. Alright? How can China dominate everything? But of course, it will try to be more influential in mapping out certain policies. Say for example, in terms of economics, President Obama is trying to rebalance the so-called Asia-Pacific strategy. Alright? And it's coming back. He would like to call himself a Pacific president, so to speak, right? But then, having said that, China is fully aware of the fact that, the Americans are concerned with the rise of China. The Americans have been telling the Chinese that they're concerned about the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. The Americans are now leaving the TPP. I think you're aware of that, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, under the leadership of the United States. The Chinese are now trying to do something likewise. Just now, the leadership talk about One Belt, One Road, Asia infrastructure and bank and so on and so forth. And it's also proposing some regional cooperation framework, like the RCEP. I don't know if you've heard about it, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is something for ASEAN, China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, New Zealand, but without the United States. Oh, okay, because of the shortage of time, so the point I want to stress is that there is a balancing game, no doubt, but this is what we call the hedging strategy, okay, adopted by the ASEAN. And of course, ASEAN, if ever it wants to maintain its neutrality, I would suggest that it must be able to put its own house in order. We have too many differences among ourselves. We're pretty good in dealing with the outside world, but you talk to one another and then you realize that, we do have some problems. Alright? Maintaining unity, no doubt, is important. And that's why, let's go back to all these concepts about the ASEAN community, the ASEAN political security community, the ASEAN economic community, the ASEAN social cultural community, all promoted by ASEAN. Hopefully, that there is a community of nations in South Asia promoting the interests of this part of the world. Thank you very much.
I have to leave in a minute, therefore I will give a brief answer. But you will stay with the chat, you can ask more for the next half an hour or an hour. As for the two questions, for the first one, I agree with the Lito that with the American presence, I think it will be very difficult for China to be hegemonic, but definitely China wants to be influential in this part of the world. But I think it's up to ASEAN whether we will let any country having influence in this part of the world or not. As for your second question about Thailand, has been an honest broker or not, in my opinion, I think we did. Because in the past 3 years, if we did not play honest broker, we would not be able to get the Chinese and ASEAN together for a dialogue for 3 years, and being able to get commonalities with the common elements to be included in the COC, which will be up to Singapore to try to speed it up in the future. Without that, because before Thailand become the coordinator, China did not pay attention at all on having to engage in the COC. They thought that it is no use, but with Thailand efforts and Thailand insistence, China was able to agree and spend put through 3 years to gain these commonalities. And If you have any other question, Dr. Lee Lai Tong, you need to answer instead of me. Thank you very much.
Okay, is there any question?
Good afternoon, Professor Dr. Lee. I'm Ajahn Srichak from School of Law. I want to know about Singapore. You know, Singapore is one of the country that sharply feels the sense of competition between the US and China, right? I want to know about how Singapore can balance the relationship between the two big powers. Yes, that's the first question. And the last question for me depend on the ALD, the National League for Democracy of Aung San Suu Kyi won the general election in Myanmar in the last 2 weeks maybe. Do you think how does it affect to the China and Myanmar relationship? Because the relationship between China and the military government are very strong. Thank you very much.
Well, the first question is about how Singapore balances the influence of the major powers. Well, this is actually a very important question for us, in the sense that over the years, Singapore has been trying to be friendly towards everybody. We like to think that we do not have enemies. Even at the time of the Cold War, just in case you do not know, yes, we were fighting against the communists, but at the same time, we were also trading with the Soviet Union and also China. You just look at the statistics. So in that way, it is trying to be friendly towards everybody, all right? But for some reasons, and especially when it's threatening the security of Singapore, we don't really care if you're from the Soviet Union or from the United States. If you look at the record, even for the United States, which we have been working very, very closely, there were times that we strained our relationship with Washington because of their interference into the domestic politics of Singapore. We asked one of the embassy staff to leave Singapore. All right? We also punished one of the Americans in Singapore for violating one of the laws in Singapore, because that young boy from the United States, were actually committing all sort of crimes in Singapore. And according to our law, he has to be punished by caning. That's the British way. We inherited that from British. And so there was a campaign against Singapore in the United States because Singapore was going to cane that American boy because of what he did. He was having all sort of graffitis on the wall. He was breaking down all the signposts in the Singapore roads and so on and so forth. So that was not acceptable and it has to be punished. Right? So even President Clinton at that point tried to ask the Singapore government not to cane him, because to the Americans that's inhumane. But that is a law applicable to everybody, whether it's Americans or Singaporeans or Indonesians, makes no difference. So in the end, in order to give some face, so to speak, to the Americans, the number of strokes of the cane was reduced. I think by 2. It was supposed to be 5 canes and then reduced to 3 canes. You just press the head and cane the ball. And so what I'm trying to say is that yes, we would like to work with the major powers, whether it's China, US, Japan, India, and even to some extent Russia. Okay? All of them are most welcome. And the strategy that we adopt is that you don't bar anybody from coming in. It's impossible. Because as I said, you cannot ask that the major powers leave. And so you have to be realistic. But then in inviting them to come, you make sure that nobody is telling you what to do. Nobody is interfering into your domestic politics. That's not acceptable. Alright? So once they seem to be interfering into domestic politics, in this case, of course, the United States, we also have problems with them. Alright? And so in that way, it is a balancing game that we are adopting. As I've said, you can use the term hedging. Hedging. That is, we try to spread out our links with different parties, the Americans, the Chinese, the Japanese, and Indonesians, and so as well. We have we like to think, these are all friends, alright? And so in that way, I think we can always dilute the dominance of any power, including the Americans, alright? And in that way, we manage to survive as a small city-state. Not only surviving, we also manage to get a lot of benefits from different parties, including China and the United States, right? But I think in the final analysis, there is a realistic recognition in China that the world, especially in terms of security, will be dominated by the Americans and the Chinese. These are the two that will decide or play a critical role in shaping our future, especially the security architecture of Asia's region. Alright? So we try to play the role of a middleman. Alright? We want to tell the Chinese what the Americans are thinking about, what the Americans are doing. When we go to Washington, the Americans will ask us, what do you think of the Chinese work? They have to blah, blah, blah. Right? And so we are considered as a good channel to communicate with the other side. Alright? And so in that way, we hope that China and the United States can work together, will have dialogues. If there are problems, they can talk it over. I think the worst case scenario is that if the two, that is the United States, is fighting against China, we are asked to take side. Which side are you on? That would be, I think, very difficult for us. Because we don't want to take any side. So we just hope that the two will not have serious conflicts. We hope the two will work together. And that if they have problems, talk about it and try to resolve them. Alright? So in that way, that is how we're handling the influence of the major powers. We are realistic, but at the same time, we're fully aware that it is important for us to retain our territorial integrity and our sovereignty. Make sure that they don't really interfere into our domestic politics. Okay? So that's the question on Singapore. The second question is about, I think, Myanmar, am I correct? And how the situation in Myanmar will affect China's relations with Myanmar. I don't have a crystal ball, all right? But I would believe that from the Chinese perspective, it is important for them to work together with Myanmar, all right? Over the years, I think the Chinese have been most supportive. Even the military government, I think have been liaising with China very, very closely, all right? And China would like to invest more in Myanmar if possible. In fact, not so long ago, they would like to construct a dam. Unfortunately, the dam was dropped because of the concern and suspicion that the Chinese are really exploiting the resources in Myanmar. All right? On top of that, just now I mentioned about the problems of the minority groups supported by the Chinese. So these could be problems. But I don't think they are very difficult to resolve, right? If the Chinese can sit down and talk to the government, whether it's a new government under organization or the present government, I think something can be worked out. Because after all, the Chinese are also pragmatic, understand that it's important to give the people in Myanmar that they are out there to be helpful. And that what they propose are actually mutually beneficial. Alright? So in that way, I think whether it's Aung San Suu Kyi or some other governments, they will talk to China and see if they can get a good deal out of Chinese. And I think in many ways, the Chinese is now in a better position to be more helpful. Alright? In fact, if you look at, say for example, the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement that I mentioned in my lecture just now, it's actually meant to promote more trade and more investment to help, particularly the states in continental Southeast Asia, because they're having trade deficits with China. In other words, China was actually exporting too many things to these places, so that they've got a deficit. And so this agreement, that is the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement, was meant to balance the trade agreement by getting more products from the Southeast Asian region. Right? And so China actually has made a deliberate political move to work closely with Southeast Asia. Right? The Chinese would also like to impress on you that it is easier for Asians to work together, because that's always a problem in America. And therefore, they are more comfortable working with Asians. They always say that let's do it in our Asian way. Let's do it in what they call the Oriental way. Right? And so I would suggest that we can afford to be cautiously optimistic that China will try to be more helpful, especially when it's trying to emphasize the importance of neighboring regions. Bear in mind that one of the major emphasis of Chinese foreign policy in recent years is to promote friendly ties with neighboring regions. 睦邻外交, meaning that to be friendly with neighboring regions. And that will include South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you for question and answer.
We have now reached the end of our public lecture. So we would like to thank you, our distinguished scholar, for an insightful and intellectual stimulating lecture.
Okay, and great appreciation to you, our audience, for your active participation. We are sure the lecture today is greatly beneficial for all of you. On behalf of School of Social Innovation and the Area-Based Social Innovation Research Center, we would like to present our guest the token of appreciation. Kindly invite Ajahn Jirada Natsuwan to present the gifts.